Dr. Welsing, welcome back to WOL Radio.
Yes, good morning, Carl. I'm glad to be with you and your radio audience.
Dr. Welsing, it seems like these spate of killings of our young people, and they seem to be mostly young people, seems like it's happening more frequently these days. Am I imagining things, or is it really happening? And if so, why is it it's the younger generation?
Well, who better than to destroy than the young, because they make the future. But again, this recent killing in Chicago, it's not just the young, it's black people. And I would say, if anything, it's more males than females. Carl, I think that the day we begin to state collectively and certainly as a critical mass that we are dealing with a system of racism, white supremacy, and that system is about white genetic survival. And the parallel that we can look at is what happened to the Semites of the Jewish religion in Europe when Adolf Hitler said, I'm not focusing on them because of their religion, I'm focusing on them because they are not white. Now that was his viewpoint, and he was getting rid of non-white people for white genetic survival in Germany and in the rest of Europe. And we keep sliding away from saying that this is a system of racism, white supremacy. And based on that, it's logical, it's tragic, it's unjust, but it's logical. We don't have to keep saying why. In Nazi Germany, they could kill people with impunity who were, had a yellow star on their clothing to indicate they weren't white. So they could be beat up in the street, humiliated, their property could be taken away from them at will. That was what the system was about. And as long as they didn't want to focus on the fact that they could not be assimilated, they wanted to be assimilated and accepted. And you cannot, if your survival is an issue of genetic survival, you cannot assimilate people that you say are not white. They have to go.
So Dr. Welsing, is that the issue, that our people want to assimilate? We still want to integrate?
Yes. We want to believe we can be Americans. This is what we have been told. This is what, when the hundreds of years of our formal enslavement, we want those chains off, and we want to be accepted as Americans.
Well, hold that thought right there, because Malik says this is part of the problem is that we have a black man in the White House, and so what we're seeing in the streets is a retaliation because we have a white man in the White House. Some people think that we may have arrived. And I'll let you respond on the other side. I hear my drummers warming up. 800-450-7876 to speak to Dr. Welsing. We'll take your calls 24 after the hour right here on 1450 WOL, where information is power. Frances Welsing, we're better from the ISIS papers. Dr. Welsing, Brother Malik, our first guest, who says that what we're seeing happening in the streets, what we're seeing happening in the courts, of course, there's no indictment in Tamir Rice that was announced on Monday, no indictment in Eric Garner, no indictment in Michael Brown, no indictment on Sandra Bland, and probably some other names that I don't recall. But he says this is because we have a black man in the White House. Do you agree with that? Could that be part of this problem, why it seems like we're under attack?
You mean to show that to demonstrate that it's the black president's fault that is happening? I would say not so. I think that we were sort of given a black man as president so we would think that it was a democracy and not a system of racism, white supremacy. because that's what we wanted to believe, that things could really be drastically different for black people. I mean, that's not a crime for people to want to believe something, but then they have to come back and deal with the reality. I think that the system was opened up to be, well, let's making a gesture towards inclusion. But I think that what has really happened is in this refinement of racism, white supremacy, Neely Fuller says that refinement is don't call him the N-word, give him a big desk and 10 white secretaries, but don't give him any power. That's under Neely Fuller's analysis of system of racism. But I say what has happened in the refinement stage of racism, white supremacy, you had an opening up for white females to begin to relate to black males. You know, white females say their ideal mate is tall, dark, and handsome. Through that vehicle, they can produce a black or non-white child. And so that opening up, so we are at the point now where we have the highest incidence of white women relating to black men, which portends towards white genetic annihilation. And so the reaction, I say we are seeing in the system of racism, white supremacy, the reaction to we are not going to have it. We are not going to have white genetic annihilation. And interestingly, it is a complete parallel to what happened in Germany, because the Jewish people, the Semites of the Jewish religion, they were kept in ghettos, and they worked for an emancipation. They were let out. They could go to the universities, and they could get different jobs. And then the men, the Semites of the Jewish religion, males, started marrying German women. And at the point that it reached a high pitch, that's when Adolf Hitler, Donald Trump, came to power to put things back in the order that it needs to be for white genetic survival. And this is why I think that it is entirely possible for Donald Trump, who is coming on, he's got blonde hair as opposed to Adolf Hitler's black hair, but he comes on with the same force and the same strength of language about we're going to put things back in order. And this is why people who classify themselves as white respond to him in the way that they do, in spite of what all the pundits we see on the TV and writing different columns, you see, they're shocked because they are wrapped up in the pretense that the system is democracy, not racism, white supremacy, and fascism. But that is what the system is. I didn't make it like that, do you see? But what made it like that is that the white population on the planet are a tiny minority population, and they are genetic recessive. I didn't make it like that. White is a genetic recessive trait. It's discussed in genetics as a genetic deficiency state because of the inability to produce skin pigmentation, which is the norm for human beings on the planet. So they could be genetically annihilated, and their whole history has been about white genetic survival. And that is why there cannot be the embrace and in the incorporation of people of color. And black people have the highest genetic potential to cause white genetic annihilation. And the response is the gun. The response is we have to be able to kill them with impunity. And that's what we see happening in the court system. It's not the police acting on their own. They are just employees of within the system framework. Just like the segment of the system or the aspect of the system that controls employment, it says no, black men are not going to have jobs. Now, we can put them in jail and spend $40,000, $50,000 a year keeping one in jail, but we're not going to give them jobs so that they can function effectively as husbands and fathers, and the people can be a strong black community. We can't have that and simultaneously have white genetic survival. It's just a genetic equation, a demographic equation that nobody wants to face. And so we don't have any leadership that says racism, white supremacy is the problem. That's not going to happen. That's the thing that wants to be hidden more than anything else.
So, Dr. Welsing, what we see happening right now with these altercations with the police officers and our young people being killed, and then the officers go to court and no indictments, you're basically saying this is going to continue?
I would say that the most important card that can be played to put it in check is to call it for what it is. As long as we don't want to say we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, and the system pays a lot of money so that doesn't get stated. And I say, I've said before, that's why at this point, the greatest enemy of the system is labeled ISIS. Because the ISIS papers, more than any other book, lays out with clarity what the system is about in terms of its genetic survival. And so somehow, magically, what's called the greatest enemy of the West is ISIS. And their training manual referred to as the ISIS papers.
Right, hold that thought, Doc. I'll let you expound on that on the other side. 25 away from the top of the hour, we have news next on 1450 WOL, where information is power. Yes, Welsing, you can join us on the couch, folks, to figure out what's going on. Are we under attack, and how should we react? What should we do? What should we expect? Dr. Frances Welsing has the answers. Before we let Dr. Welsing, I'll let you finish up what you were saying about the ISIS papers.
Well, I'm not saying ISIS papers that Frances Welsing is so great. I'm as shocked as anybody else. If somebody had told me the ISIS papers, that book is 20 years old. If somebody told me that by the year 2015, ISIS would be used to describe what the system says is the greatest enemy of the West, of Western civilization. Those two words mean the collectivity of people who classify themselves as white on the planet. I'm shocked, but I can say, well, this is a system of racism, white supremacy. This is the analysis made by Neely Fuller. This is what all of my work is about. I'm the only psychiatrist in the United States that's focused on racism for 40 years, the only psychiatrist in the world. And this is a tragedy, but these are the facts. And then so to come up with ISIS is now labeled the greatest enemy, and this is supposed to be this horrific, powerful terrorist group. The reality is that the system of racism, white supremacy, is the highest form of terrorism that has ever been conceptualized on planet Earth. Because it is a system trying to structure the survival of a tiny, tiny number of people 1/10 of the population on the planet is white. And that condition means genetic recessive minority mutation from black. That's what white means. And so I say that the biggest chance that we have to begin to put a stop to it is for a critical mass of black people to be able to, not out in the street talking about we hate white people. That's cheap and that's a waste of energy. Hatred is not the answer. I mean, in other words, what does that do but, turn on the heat and open the windows and let the heat flow out? No, I say that the chance that we have is to explain. That's what psychiatry, before the days when psychiatry meant just giving people pills. Psychiatry used to mean give people insight about their behavior, help them understand the why of their conduct. And that becomes a brake on destructive behavior, so that the person is not just doing something, but this is why you are doing it. And see, the majority of the people on this planet, the majority of people who classify themselves as white say, I'm not racist. I'm not racist. And then the non-white people who fall in that wake in contradiction to reality, oh, no, they're not racist. Well, then what is the basis for black people's past 500 years of experience? But I say for the majority of people who classify themselves as white on the planet, who say they're not racist, if you want to demonstrate you're not racist, stop the ones who are. You stop the police. You are the people who have power in the system. If you're not racist, stop it. Let the black people stay in their houses and you get out of the street and march and stop it. And if nobody goes out in the street, then that becomes the proof that everybody is racist, just like what happened in Germany. They considered themselves a democratic state before Adolf Hitler came to power. But once the system opened up and you had Jewish men relating to white women, and Hitler said, this is coming to a stop. We're killing you. We're not going to have this. And this is exactly what we see happening. See, my definition of racism, white supremacy is racism, white supremacy is the local and global power system and dynamic, structured and maintained by persons who classify themselves as white, whether consciously or subconsciously determined, which consists of patterns of perception, logic, symbol formation, thought, speech, action, and emotional response, as conducted simultaneously in all areas of people activity: economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, for the ultimate purpose of white genetic survival and to prevent white genetic annihilation on planet Earth, a planet upon which the vast and overwhelming majority of people are classified as non-white, meaning black, brown, red, and yellow people, by white-skinned people, and all of the non-white people are genetically dominant in terms of skin coloration compared to the genetic recessive white-skinned people.
All right.
Consciously and or subconsciously determined. See, it's like in medicine. If you are going to fight a disease condition, you got to understand precisely what you're dealing with, not what you want to think about it, but what actually is it? What actually is it? Not fantasize about it, not have a dream about it, but have the reality. Dr. Martin Luther King, he was a brilliant, heroic sociologist, and he thought if we could love one another, but love manifested in sex between people who classify themselves as white and the people who are their genetic dominance leads to white genetic annihilation. So that can't work. So the system has its first line of defense, and that's the people who are authorized to carry guns. See, now they are authorizing guns to be carried by anybody. Take your gun to church. Take your gun to school. Because you may just have to stand your ground and participate in killing black people or other people of color should they get out of line. Because our survival is at stake. Our genetic survival is at stake. The ISIS papers that's 20 years old, and I'd have a whole chapter on the meaning of the gun. The gun is the answer. In the white male's testicles, he has recessive material that can be annihilated by black men's genetic dominant material. The gun is what they call it. Not Frances Welsing calls it. What they refer to the gun as the great equalizer.
All right, hold that thought right there, Doc. 800-450-7876. Got to take a quick break. We'll come back with your calls for Dr. Welsing next on 1450 WOL, where information is power. Dr. Frances Welsing, number to call to reach her, 800-450-7876. Line 2, Dee's been waiting for us in Baltimore. Dee, you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Yeah. Yes, good morning, Carl. How you doing?
Doing great.
Yeah, and Dr. Welsing, definitely it's an honor to speak to you. I remember when I first saw you on a video, I think it was back when you were on the Donahue show, and that kind of definitely impressed me about your character and how you handled that situation amongst that hostile environment. But my question is, I wanted to know if you could talk more about racism, white supremacy on a global scale. So sometimes we get caught into the thinking that racism, white supremacy is kind of centered here in the U.S. for some reason. And if you could talk more about how it affects us globally, basically how it affects us globally as a system.
Well, my analysis is from the time that the people classify themselves as white, the white-skinned people in Europe, when they started coming out of Europe and circumnavigating the planet, which they hadn't done before, in their voyages of discovery, what they discovered was every place on the planet was filled with people of color, and that Europe was the only place where there were white people. And when the men had sex with the women of color, now they had done that, from Roman times, in the Mediterranean and going into Africa, they could see genetic annihilation, but they did not see that the entire planet was filled with colored people. And once they understood that the world was filled with colored people that could cause white skin to disappear, I maintain consciously and or subconsciously, they designed a system to prevent that from happening. That's the motivation. That's why after formal slavery in this part of the world, and there was so-called emancipation of black people, that black men, they had to start lynching and castrating, cutting off the testicles and the phallus of black men. There's no history on the planet of black men castrating white men, showing fear of white men's genetic material. There are no people of color on the planet that ever felt consciously, subconsciously, the necessity to do that. That whole period of lynching and castrating black men, that was a whole phase of a so-called movement amongst black people because black men were being lynched just at the thought of a black man thinking about looking at a white female. But the system has moved forward where we have to keep the black people in a state of naivete, ignorance, and confusion, and we have to make them keep thinking that they have a possibility to become equal. See, the real issue is that the white people are not genetically equal to the people who can produce color. They have the genetic deficiency of not being equal to the other people on the planet. And that's why they have a system to take care of that. And so if we could ever have a critical mass of understanding on our part, see, each time we say, I don't know why they're doing that, reinforces the system. Each time we say that's not supposed to be happening, we are in denial that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, that we have the potential to understand. This is why the Attorney General said, are we a nation of cowards, being unable to talk about racism? This is the key, people. That's the subtitle of my book. Came from a black man, a cold black man at D.C. General Hospital in psychiatry admission. He said, Doc, if we could just find the keys to the colors. I'd made a diagnosis of schizophrenic reaction. But I said, let me listen to this man and try to figure out what it is that he's saying. And he made that one statement with absolute clarity. If we can just find the keys to the colors, because that's what this reaction is all about on the planet. And if our position as black people, if we took the position, if in fact we are in a system, in other words, this is our position as a people. If in fact we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, not a system of democracy, there will be more and more killings of black people, black men in particular, by the system. Instead of being shocked, why did it happen again? We say, if in fact we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, we will continue to see this carnage. And again, for the white people who say they are not racist, it's your job to get out there and stop it. And what did the Semites of the Jewish religion find out in Germany? That the German people that they thought they could assimilate with, no, they allowed it to happen. I mean, they were willing participants. And so if instead of, taking the position that, yes, there is a Santa Claus. Yes, there are white people who come down a chimney and bring gifts to black people. That's our position. That's our real position. Yes, there is a Santa Claus. Yes, Jesus Christ is white. Yes, God is white. And one day Santa Claus is going to love us. And one day white Jesus is going to love black people. Red, yellow, black, and white, all are precious in his sight. These are all the fantasies of the system of racism, white supremacy. If Jesus was a historic figure, even Billy Graham said he couldn't be white. Not be in that part of the world where they say he came from. He could not have been white. Billy Graham said it. And anybody with any awareness of geography and the demographics in different parts of the world know that he could not have been white. But we just passed the so-called Christmas holidays and the promotion. Look at all of these white images of Jesus and his disciples and the people that lived at that time. You see, but even the Bible says he was the color of burnt bronze, and he had woolly hair, which is why the Romans put that crown of thorns on his head, mocking his hair. But
hold that thought, Doc.
Our 500 years, our several hundred years of enslavement.
Right, hold that thought right there. 800-450-7876 to speak to Dr. Frances Welsing. We're going to take a quick break for a traffic update. Come back and take more of your calls right here on 1450 WOL, where information is power. Psychiatrist Dr. Frances Welsing, trying to explain to us why this spate of killings of our young people is continuing, mostly in our urban centers, and what can we do about it? Number to call to speak to her is 800-450-7876. Janice is waiting for us on line 1 in Washington, D.C. Janice, you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Good morning, Dr. Welsing, and good morning, Carl.
Good morning. Mm-hmm.
I just want to tell you this. You know what my concern is? I cannot take my children to the playground because of this shooting. And it's not the police that are doing that. It's not white people. It is other blacks. Now, but I agree with you about the system of white supremacy, but Dr. Frances Welsing and Carl, we have got to address the killers in our own community. We have to address that before we can get any respect from the world. You know, all these black people being killed in the district, Baltimore and everything, they're killed by other blacks, and nobody's saying a word. You don't see protest about that. Protest that, because the police, sure, they're rogue police, but the police are not killing us. It's black people killing other blacks, and that has got to be addressed. Lastly, Dr. Welsing, you're talking about Donald Trump. Excuse me, he's racist maybe, but so is Hillary Clinton. And I don't know why black folks have a love affair with the Democratic Party, because they're all racist. So it's not only Donald Trump, but we have got to address the killers in our own community first before we go to somebody else.
All right, let's give her a chance to respond. Thanks, Janice. Dr. Welsing?
No, I absolutely agree with what the caller is saying. In other words, there's not a single candidate that is running for president, not a Republican or not a Democrat, that is saying they are going to stop the killing of black people, or that they recognize that there is a system of racism, white supremacy. Not a single one. Not a single one. And yet black people are being told, go vote and go hope. Go vote and hope. You see, black people ought to be saying, if you want our vote, if you want a single black vote, then you're going to have to admit there's a system of racism, white supremacy, denounce it, and say you're going to do something about it. Now, let me talk about the black on black. You can set up a people. If you set up a people and you have high-level unemployment, you have high-level lack of information, high-level unemployment, and then you put drugs and guns, you give that to the people, you are saying, now you can kill each other. I know you're depressed because I don't have jobs for you. I know you're depressed and upset because there's no decent housing. And you're depressed because there's no future for you. But I will give you the equipment so that you can kill each other out of your frustration. And so the caller is absolutely right. And when Neely Fuller, in his textbook for victims of racism, white supremacy, and he listed the behaviors that black people should stop engaging in, and these behaviors begin to help counter racism. He says, stop name-calling one another. Stop gossiping about one another. Stop squabbling with one another. Stop snitching on one another for reasons of personal gain. Stop cursing one another. Stop being discourteous to one another. Stop being disrespectful to one another. Stop stealing from one another. Stop robbing one another. Stop fighting one another, and stop killing one another. This is from his work in 1954. So it's not just labeling. The people who classify themselves as white structured a system for their genetic survival. And that's what they're doing. We who are the victims of the system, have to employ our ability to analyze and develop strategies and tactics as best we can to counter it. But they're not going to destroy the system that they structured for their own survival.
That's why we need to protest, Dr. Welsing, the ones who are killing in our own communities. I can't take my children to the playground, Dr. Welsing, because it's black people doing the shooting.
Well, in other words, what we have to do, see, as a people, I would say, which is what I started out saying, black people don't want to face the fact that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy. If we were to face that fact and function with an analysis as opposed to just complaining,
right,
then we would talk about what we need to do with our behavior. But what did the Attorney General say? Are we a nation of cowards being unable to face the fact of racism and talk about it? That's what we're not doing. And so all black people, if I could wave the magic wand when we get off this radio show, we'd all be talking about we're in a system of racism, white supremacy, and this is why we're seeing what we see.
All right. 800-450-7876. Thank you, Janice. Thanks for your call. 12 after the hour. Let's go to line 3. Let's go out to Dr. Estenu in L.A. Dr. Estenu, you're on with Dr. Welsing.
Good morning, Carl. Good morning, Dr. Welsing. Thank you for taking my call. So, after I heard the results of the grand jury decision in Tamir Rice's case, my first reaction was rage, but then I really started to think about Dr. Welsing's theory. And I came across a number of different articles that really support her theory. The first one is from the Los Angeles Times, December 1st, 2015, by Barbara Ehrenreich. The title is When White Power Wanes, and it talks about recently published research that shows members of the white working class ages 45 to 54 are dying at an accelerated rate. In the last 4 years, the lifespan between poor white men and wealthier ones has widened by up to 4 years. And then I came across another article from the Associated Press that talks about exclusive 4 in 5 in the U.S. face near poverty, no work. And then the last one I got off of the Pew Research Center website from April 11, 2014, that says birth rates lag in Europe and the U.S., and it goes on to say in many developed nations, the average number of children that a woman has in her lifetime is now less than 2, falling short of the approximate fertility necessary for a generation to replace itself. And it helped to make sense of everything that's been going on. And to me, it really supports Dr. Welsing's theory, and I'd like to get her reaction.
Well, what I can say is, I tried to, when I became a psychiatrist in training, I started to try to figure out what is making us mentally ill as black people. That was the question in my mind. I want to find out what's making us mentally ill, so that as a black physician, as a black psychiatrist, I could help.
Right. Hold that thought right there, Doc. We got to take a quick break for traffic. With Dr. Frances Welsing, we're all collectively sitting on a couch and trying to figure out what's going on with these killings of our young people and what can we do about it. Dr. Welsing, I'm going to let you finish your response to Dr. Estenu's questions about, he says, articles that he read that bolster your theory.
Well, Well, do you see, in other words, people classify themselves as white, some writers talking about their survival and their numerical vulnerability on the planet, which is a reality. They are concerned about their genetic survival. Black people, black males, because only males can impose sexual intercourse, are perceived as the great threat to their genetic survival. I'm encouraging everybody to go and get the book, The Rising Tide of Color Against White World Supremacy, that was written in 1922. Published in 1922 by Stoddard, Stoddard. Don't believe Frances Welsing. Don't believe Neely Fuller. Here, read a white person talking about their vulnerability against the rising tide of colored people in Asia and Africa. Written in 1922, almost 100 years ago. So read with clarity what they think. And then we have to try to get this enough respect for ourselves to face a reality instead of the fantasy that we have that white people are going to love us. How can they love us and genetically survive at the same time? They see it as impossible. So you have to be killed. And I have to program you psychologically by having you call yourselves niggers and gangsters and thugs and dogs and bitches and hoes. I pay multiple millions so that your artist will be engaging in your psychological warfare and calling you these names. The lady who called about her child not being able to go to the playground. See if you have any music in your home, so-called music, that talks about nigger, that talks about gangster, that talks about thug, because this is the brainwashing that is going on massively amongst us, setting the stage. If I'm a nigger, if I'm a bitch or a hoe, then it's okay if I'm killed. It's okay if my children are killed. If I'm a gangster and a thug, why should I protest somebody sending me to prison? Or remove me and put me in a concentration camp? No, I'm a nigger. It doesn't mean anything for me to call myself a nigger. I'm a nigger. And if somebody like C. Dolores Tucker, God bless her soul, comes along and says, don't do it. Oh, no, I have a right to call myself a nigger or a nigger or a niglet. Oh, no, I love to call myself names. And then we want to know, why do we engage in killing? Because we are being programmed to hate ourselves and to wish we were white.
You know, Dr. Welsing, a couple of other books that support that theory that you're talking about is The Birth Dearth by Ben Wattenberg that came out in the 80s, and then I believe in the 90s,
Exactly.
Pat Buchanan wrote a book called The Death of the West.
Exactly.
But, you know, and just things to consider as we analyze this case. First of all, Ohio is an open carry state, meaning it is legal to walk around with a gun, right? And the second thing is that the police lied on the police report. What the white officer wrote in his police report does not line up with what we see on the videotape. So, you know, we just need to really be very clear about what's going on. And I appreciate Dr. Welsing so much. You just don't know. It's really helped me stay sane, you know, with these most recent decisions. And so thank you very much, and I'll listen to your response off the air.
All right. Thanks, Brother Stanu. Dr. Welsing, in Cleveland, some of the people are calling for LeBron James to boycott it as a sort of a protest for the decision not to indict the officer who shot Tamir Rice. Are we putting or expecting too much of celebrities and athletes?
Come on. I mean, why put it on one sports person? It's all of us. It's every single one of us that are responsible for changing it. It's every single one of us, every single one of us, that has to try to generate some self-respect as a black person and hope that that self-respect rises to the point of having the courage to look at the problem as opposed to the fantasy that Santa Claus loves me. White God loves me. This is where we're caught. And all of that negative music, all that negative language where people think they're just listening to the beat. No, this is the biggest brainwashing that has ever occurred in history, where the people themselves are being programmed to participate in their genocide and in their annihilation. This is where we are. And please don't think I'm saying anything, spend any time, not 1 nanosecond, talking about hate white people. No, we better get calm and quiet and see ourselves on the black side of the chessboard and try to figure out what it is that we need to do. But we're not going to go any place if we can't face reality. See, the job, when I was trained in psychiatry many years ago, we were taught the role of the psychiatrist is to help people face reality even when they are afraid to do so. And we're frightened to death. Give me a blonde wig that I can put on my head. See, if black men were checked, you see, what is their fantasy? To get with a white woman. What's black women's fantasy? To see themselves in scandal, rolling around in the bed with some so-called powerful white man, as though that's different than when we were in formal slavery. That's where we are. Clowning like an empire. All kinds of crazy images of us as black people. We don't have a clue about what black defamation is. I mean, you create negative images of people as you are in the process of killing them.
800-450-7876. Let's go closer to the epicenter where this is taking place. Line 1, Yvette is calling us from Akron, Ohio. Yvette, do you have a question for Dr. Welsing?
Yes, actually I do. I've been thinking about this for many years. I can remember my children were young.
Right, hang on a second, Yvette. We got to take a quick break. I'll let you pose your question for Dr. Welsing on the other side. Calling with us at 30 after the hour with our guest, Dr. Frances Welsing. Let's go back to line 1, Yvette in Akron, Ohio. Yvette, your question for Dr. Welsing.
I was just thinking. I remember when my kids were young, and I walk them to the school, and this is 20 years ago, and the kids would be fighting, and the little White Cross guard would stand there and watch them fight, and I would tell them, "Why are you fighting each other? You're going to have battles when you become older that are much more important than who's crossing the street first. Become friends, fight those battles together." But here is my question. I remember just reading a few things. I'm new to this. I'm a black woman, but I was raised by a lot of white men. And I remember reading the Willie Lynch letters and so on and so forth, and watching how our black people were brainwashed into hating each other back in slavery, where they would have, the one slave beating the other slaves, and the women and the children watching their men be humiliated and snatched away from the families, snatched away and divided. And then the parents learning that if you want to control your children, then you got to beat them too, and which ended up happening to me. And as I've gotten older, I've learned that is still in our psyche. It's still in the psyche of our young people, because we have.
Well, let me stop you here first, and then you can ask the question. But the Willie Lynch letter was a fake. It's been proven to be a fake. You need to listen to the show more often, and then you'll understand. But what is your question, your direct question for Dr. Welsing? Because the Willie Lynch letter was a fake. We had the guy on who actually wrote it. We had the guy who blew the cover off it. But what is your question for Dr. Welsing?
My question is, how do we get into the psyche of our young men and undo the brainwashing that has been going on for centuries? Thank you.
Well, it's getting into the psyche of all of us, not just the young people. The older people are responsible for what the younger people think and what the older people understand or whether we don't understand. It's everybody's responsibility to understand that we are in a system of racism, white supremacy, which is just an extension of former slavery, and how we are brainwashed. We have to all understand, and we have to help each other understand. There's an African proverb that says, each one teach one. I mean, we teach each other how to dance, and we teach each other the latest dirty joke. We need to start teaching each other and helping each other understand this system that is designed to destroy us. And we don't have time to hate. We have to see ourselves at a chessboard, and we're on the black side of the chessboard. And we are responsible for understanding the game and understanding the plays that need to be made and understand what we need to do to replace the system of injustice, which is racism, white supremacy, and to replace it with a system of justice. And I say the foundation for justice is self-respect. Justice is not something that somebody gives to us. It's something that we shape and mold into, put into play, because we respect ourselves so much that anything that is about our destruction, we are putting it in check. For example, the system of racism, white supremacy, depends upon black people and other people of color waging war with each other all over Africa, all over the Middle East, fight and kill each other. Help me maintain racism, white supremacy. And if we spend our time not loving a white God, but loving ourselves, and I say that as somebody who was baptized in the Baptist religion and christened AME, that we have been brainwashed into loving white more than we love ourselves. And so anything that white wants us to do, we do. And take the guns that they manufacture, take the drugs that they manufacture, and use it amongst ourselves. And we have to understand, we even have to understand, when should black people be reproducing themselves under the condition of racism, white supremacy? I say they need to be married and they need to be in their 30s. So they don't bring children in the world that they cannot take care of, because when you can't take care of children, those children end up waging war against their own people because they were treated with disregard. See, I say if you play with sex, the joke is on the offspring.
800-450-7876, 25 away from the top of the hour. Let's go to line 5. Mike's calling us from Columbus, Ohio. Mike, you have a question for Dr. Welsing.
Good morning, Carl. Good morning, Carl. Ms. Frances, it's a pleasure.
Good morning.
Yes, the problem is our fault. As you say, it's a system, but every morning across this globe, across the country, we send our kids to the system to be educated. A lot of it's our fault. We send our kids off to their schools to learn their lives, and they don't teach them anything about who they are. We are our own enemy in such a way that we won't pull away and be brave enough to say we won't take this anymore. Because if we want to eat, if we want to sleep or put a roof over our head, we got to depend on them. And until we get courage enough to pull away from this, we're going to suffer. When that lady says she can't go to the playground, it's our fault, because every morning you get up and send your kids to be indoctrinated to a system of racism. We don't have our own schools. We don't teach our kids about themselves. We teach these lies. We don't make guns. They do. They take pride in their ability to kill. The question I have for you is, are you aware of the race whitening that the white man tried to do? There's a documentary out. The movie's called The Rabbit Proof Fence, a true story where the white man tried to change the bloodline of blacks by having sex with so many young people till they lighten them up. You go to Australia today, you'll see that the original Aborigines are out by the military camps on reservations, and the people in the cities look white. This is through race whitening. So are you aware of that? And the other question is, what do we do to get courage to stop participating in this matrix? Because it's a lie, and we continue to send our kids out there. And our young people, for that lady who called in, they worship money. Our kids don't know about God or go to the white Jesus. They know the main thing is that green God, and they'll kill each other over it just to participate, to eat, to have. They go to the mall to put on fancy shoes. They go crazy. And until we save our kids and pull your kids up out of there, why would you continue to send your kids off to become devils?
All right.
We can't dance with this.
To respond, Mike, because you're repeating yourself. Dr. Welsing, is it the educational, is that where it lies, the issue in the school system?
The education of black children begins before the sperm meets the egg. The education begins, what is our knowledge when we go into the activity of reproducing ourselves? Are we playing games and making children that we can't take care of and educate? So the education... Go ahead.
Mike, let her finish.
No, I'm just saying, when you say education, when you say it starts with the sperm, when we arrived here, it started from the time we got here. How do you get?
All right, Mike, we're going to have to let you, because we got to take a break, and we come back. I'll let Dr. Welsing respond to what's your question with our guest, psychiatrist Dr. Frances Welsing. And Dr. Welsing, I'll let you finish responding to Mike's question. He's saying that the problem starts in the schools.
Well, see, I'm just trying to say that we can teach our children at home. If we saw it's our responsibility to give lessons in history to our children. Now, it takes a whole lot of money to build a school and maintain a school, and people who don't have jobs don't have a whole lot of money to do that. But they can think about what it is that I'm going to teach my child before they leave my house. What is it that I'm going to teach them about respecting themselves and valuing themselves and valuing their skin color and valuing their hair texture? Am I going to teach them that? Or am I going to have them listen to music that demeans dark skin color? See, what am I educating my child to believe by the kind of so-called music and language that I have radiating in my home, that the system of racism wants me to teach them, to demean black? You see, or it could be a little baby who doesn't even go to school, and somebody is calling him a name or calling her a name because their skin color is dark. Instead of, we ought to be saying most black is most beautiful. That's the parent color from which all of the colors come. So we have to understand the system. We have to understand the programming that the system takes us through. We have to understand when we turn on that TV in the morning to get the news and to get the weather, that we're seeing white, 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 white. And those white, 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 clowning black person, white, 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 overweight black person, white, 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 white. That's our morning daily dose of racism, white supremacy. Love white, hate ourselves. And so if we begin to understand it, then we know how to play the black side of the chessboard. You don't even have to turn off the TV. You can limit it, the amount of TV that you look at. But you understand, in a system of racism, white supremacy, the television, the videos, the movies teach racism, white supremacy. Help the children understand that. but by valuing the children and not calling the children names and not yelling at them and beating them because we're frustrated. And this is why I say that teaching a child happens before the sperm meets the egg. Either I'm playing or I'm engaged in very serious, self-respecting activity. The system of racism teaches sex is dirty because they don't like the way they look. And we just follow along blindly, going into our destruction. But I'm saying we have to pull back and say, hey, what is happening? That's the question that black people raise when they greet each other. Hey, what's happening? What's happening? And we ask it repeatedly because we haven't yet fully understood what's going on. But we can understand. And we can teach ourselves to understand the system and how to counter this system of destruction by not being the willing participants. See, each time we hate black, we are willing participants in the maintenance of the system of racism, white supremacy. And so we have to reach a point where we do a lot of reading and do a lot of thinking and do a lot of serious talking with one another and helping each other understand what the system is about. It's not going to change itself if it's a system for white survival, but we can change our participation in it. Because simply if black people begin to respect themselves, that would be making the system collapse. The system has to have the non-white global majority hating each other and willing to fight and kill each other. That's what helps hold the system up. And if we decided, no, this is not what we're going to do, we're going to value ourselves, we're going to respect ourselves, we're going to teach our children to value and respect themselves as black. Like we got a lot of little children running around. I'm not black. I'm mixed race. Where do they learn that? See, do they learn that from parents who have been brainwashed by the system of racism, white supremacy? And so if I'm a little child and I don't like black, well, then if somebody gives me a gun, I can kill black because I don't like black, as opposed to the children having been taught based on what they see happening around them. Little children are captive in the households. They can't get a suitcase and say, I'm going to go someplace where black people respect each other. No, they're caught right there in that atmosphere, and either the atmosphere is respecting black, being respectful and courteous, and that's where those behaviors that Neely Fuller first talked about not name-calling one another and not squabbling with one another, not cursing one another. Stop being discourteous and disrespectful. Stop fighting and stop killing. Just imagine if black people codified themselves into counter racism and just practiced those top 10 behaviors. Where would we be as a people if black people, we don't kill each other. No, we don't fight with each other. Oh, no, that was a long time ago before we understood what was really happening. No, we don't do that anymore. And I add to that list. Stop throwing down trash where black people live, work, and play. Stop making dirt and filth the norm. Because if you make trash, you'll think of yourself as trash. Stop using and selling drugs to one another. Stop black children from thinking that as children they can be adequate mothers and fathers. Stop believing that welfare will save you. Start believing in prosperity. Stop pretending that racism, white supremacy does not exist. Stop being divided and conquered. Stop allowing black, brown, red, and yellow people being divided by white supremacy. And Carl, I want to say this about, the people who have called in, not today, but on past occasions, and saying that white supremacy does not exist. Supremacy is who has the ability to kill whom with impunity.
All right, hold that thought. I'll let you expound on that on the other side. We got to take a quick break. And thank you for staying there 6 away from the top. We're running out of time. But Dr. Welsing, are you still at Howard University?
You mean my lecture series?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, the second Thursday of every month, September through June, 7 to 10 p.m., Howard University Blackburn Center.
All right. And before you go, expound again on that supremacy, because some people get hung up on that word supreme, and they, white people are not supreme more than me. They don't understand what you say. If you can do it real quickly, the system of white supremacy
just simply implies who has the power. Do you see? Who has the power to kill whom with impunity? And this is what we're seeing every time we jump up distressed because another black person has been killed and the court system says that they are not guilty, that they can kill with impunity. That's what supremacy means, power. Who has the power? Dominance. Black people cannot kill white people with impunity in a system of racism, white supremacy. And I just want to say in closing, if we are in fact in a system not of democracy, but a system of racism, white supremacy, we can expect that there will be more and more killings of black people with impunity. Black people in general, but black men in particular. The proof will when we see the next one and the next one and the next one. And maybe by then we will be convinced as black people that we better focus on system of racism, white supremacy, and be able to shape and mold our behavior so as to counter it with black self-respect and black courage. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Dr. Welsing. I think that sums it up. And folks, Dr. Frances Welsing, she's told us how to turn this around, black self-respect and black courage. I also want to thank Malik Spellman, who joined us earlier from Los Angeles, who was talking about the shootings that were going on, this spate of killings, and Dr. Welsing just said it's going to continue until we change our behavior. Also, I want to thank Fred Hampton Jr. from Chicago, who told us what was going on in Chicago. And, of course, all of this coming into reaction to the no indictment returned on Monday in Tamir Rice's shooting, the teenager, the young brother that was shot by cops in Cleveland. And now you saw this some activists in Cleveland are calling on LeBron James to sit out just as this a show of solidarity. They throwing it back on him, says you return home because you want to support our people. Now he supports Tamir Rice. They want him to sit out in a couple of games in the NBA. So anyway, that's the show, folks. Kevin says we got to get out of here, so that's what we're going to do. Traffic's next for the listeners in the DMV. We'll join you tomorrow at 6 o'clock. But we want you to stay strong, stay positive, stay in the light right here on 1450 WOL, where information is power.